Hey everybody, Jason Bermas here, and what you're about to watch is a great conversation I had on 9/11 hosted by Jeremy Rice, aka the alien scientist, and including reporter George Webb. It's a banger. This is just going to be the first part. You're not going to want to miss it. Buckle up and get ready to make sense of the madness.
Well, guys, um, I'm here joined with Jason Bermas, who you just saw in that brief clip. Let me just bring my mic over here. And we're going to talk about the official story of 9/11 because I think it really starts with that. The government has this idea that 19 Arab hijackers took a bunch of all four of those planes, got past security with some box cutters, and hijacked the planes and flew them into all these sensitive targets, including the Pentagon, like an hour and a half after they knew the first flight was hijacked, so that they would have been on alert and had known about this. This is the military command center. We had to have known about this. All the people who were in charge that day, again, it seems that they failed us on 9/11, and we need new hearings. Do you think Trump will come through on that, Jason?
I don't know. I'm one of those guys that, for me, I've been politically homeless forever. You know this. I've never bought into the right or left paradigm. At the same time, I do think Trump was a disruptor in many ways. Right now, when we're looking at the RFK, MLK, and JFK stuff, I mean, we still don't have all the JFK stuff. If you've actually been paying attention to that, there have been a couple of smaller releases. One was like, I think 16 PDF files and then several hundred. So I don't even know the drip on that. I would say this.
Well, I'll tell you about RFK. I know something really juicy about that is that Gene, there's two guys that were involved in the investigation who were in LAPD who were CIA, Manny Pina and Hank Hernandez. And both these guys were CIA. And this was going to come up for a reinvestigation. They were going to have the Justice Department in California bring this case open because this is not like JFK where the whoever was on the grassy knoll got away. They didn't no one got a clear picture. They confiscated everyone's camera footage from the grassy knoll who caught what anything that could have happened there. And who knows where that footage, the Beverly Oliver film, the Gordon Arnold film, all that stuff's gone. So the JFK one is a little different. RFK, we have the smoking gun. I mean, we literally have Thane Eugene Caesar's pistol. His tie was ripped off and pulled to the floor by Bobby Kennedy, who knew who killed him. He knew who shot him from behind. He grabbed the guy's tie and pulls it off him. You can see pictures of him going through without his tie on. He sells the gun to a guy he works with. It was going to come up for investigation. And you know the California DA's name who blocked that case, Jason?
No.
Kamala Harris.
Well, I don't think that should shock anybody. I would say this, getting back to 9/11, after I did that Kurt Weldon interview, I think a week or two later, I had Anthony Schaefer on. For those not familiar, Kurt Weldon was the senator that brought forth Abel Danger. Anthony Schaefer was the lieutenant colonel in charge of that. And Schaefer says he's talked to Trump directly. And I mean, again, you can go watch the interview. You take it for what he says, that Trump wants it out. He wants the 9/11 stuff. I don't know that that's going to happen. I mean, aside from the people on the inside that would be accountable at the highest levels, and when I say the highest levels, we're talking about the executive within the executive. We're talking about the continuity of government program. I've always said George W. Bush had no knowledge, and that H.W. Bush is probably somebody that you would have wanted to investigate. Of course, you can't do that anymore. A lot of people don't know this, but H.W. Bush actually spent the night in the White House on September 10th and was there on September 11th while his son was down in Florida with his brother with the book, and then gets fettered away on Air Force One and to several secure locations during the day. And Cheney, of course, is the vice president at the time. He's the one actually not only in the White House, but gets taken down into the operation of emergency management and essentially runs the operation from there on what to do and not to do after the two strikes on the World Trade Center and just before the strike on the Pentagon. I thought Schaefer, his interview, as bombshell as Kurt Weldon was, and no one's talking about this, direct line of money from the CIA to at least two of these hijackers. The clip you played cut off a little bit of the beginning, but I mentioned that Walid al-Shehri, his neighbor, Deborah Albritton, called the CIA on him. Okay, like we need to get it out of our minds that these people were not pinpointed by, large-scale law enforcement. They were time and time again. In that extended part of that interview, prior to me bringing up Deborah Albright, I bring up the fact that James Woods in August, just before the attacks, was on a plane. If you believe the transcripts from one of the trials that took place, that came out in the Dark Overlord dumps, he believes it was actually Flight 11, one of the planes used on 9/11. He identified 4 individuals, 2 of which the FBI confirmed to him were, I believe it was Atta, and it may have actually been Khalid al-Mihdhar. It was either Nawaf al-Hamzi or Khalid al-Mihdhar, but they weren't supposed to even be in the same cell. Now, what's really interesting about that case is James Woods is on this plane. He thinks these guys are going to hijack the plane. He pulls a stewardess over. He talks to the stewardess about it. She agrees with him. Brings the pilot, talks to the pilot. The pilot says, you know what, we're going to lock the cockpit for the rest of the way. We're going to keep our eyes on these guys. And all 3 of them filed reports after that went to the highest levels. And actually, in the court hearing that was leaked by the Dark Overlord, James Woods that says that it was confirmed to him by 2 separate individuals. He names the other FBI agent higher up than the people that he interviewed with. And then Seymour Hersh, his journalist friend, also confirmed that. I think 9/11 is going to be tough. I want to believe. Listen, man, I'm not on the hopium train, and that's the thing. You're not only talking about this government, you're talking about Israel, you're talking about Pakistan, you're talking about the funding from Saudi Arabia. And if you believe Kurt Weldon's story, which is kind of like the meat of what he's going around talking about, other than the lies about 9/11 and hinting at the controlled demolition, is that bin Laden wasn't really hiding out in Pakistan where they eventually supposedly found him, right outside of a military base.
Iran.
He says he's in Iran.
He had like 20 sources or something. Do you think that they were trying to plant false intelligence to that you think he was really in Iran and that they later moved him out of Iran to Pakistan?
It is so hard for me to tell what the real story is there, because let's just go through what we do
Falcon
and don't
guy,
know.
I think was the best source because he said he's a Falcon expert and he saw Osama's Falcons in Iran and at that compound.
And remember, he's also saying that it's Soleimani who facilitated this deal outside of the president of Iran at the time, Ahmadinejad, right? So, while they were demonizing that guy, apparently he wasn't even running what would be the military operations. Now, you also have to remember that you've got a triple cross guy in the mix. And what do I mean triple cross? So when you have the Pakistani ISI through Mehmed Sheikh Ahmed, okay, he has 100,000 wired to Atta the week before the attack, but it's by a guy named Omar Saeed Sheikh. And why do I bring him up? Well, Omar Saeed Sheikh, he's the guy that they say beheads Daniel Pearl in that initial beheading. And Daniel Pearl is this Jewish journalist that goes overseas and is trying to find out where the funding and the operations are coming from in this whole thing. He gets captured. He gets beheaded by this guy that supposedly facilitated $100,000 to the hijackers. Now, what's really scary about this is that's been overturned, okay? Now, Omar Saeed Sheikh was also accused of killing bin Laden before the infamous raid by Benazir Bhutto, whose father had been, I believe it was the president of India, and she was running for president. She eventually gets assassinated, by the way. One assassination attempt fails. You can actually watch her be killed. She's in a limousine where a man rolls up and shoots her while she's outside the limousine. But what he didn't understand is he was not the lone assassin. They had somebody in a suicide vest or an explosive device right there. They blew everybody up and killed everybody. So right now, Omar Saeed Sheikh, despite all the connections I just told you about, is in a safe house in Britain. Okay. So this guy who is connected to the war of terror in ways that we just really can't imagine, and supposedly facilitated money and, again, maybe supposedly killed bin Laden, right? Because the other thing about bin Laden is you watch those bin Laden videos that were put out for propaganda purposes. And, here's the thing. I'm not the big mask guy. You know how that was like the big conspiracy theory that kept going around like the last 3 to 5 years, that everybody was in a mask, right? um, if you watch some of those videos, there's no
Well, the
doubt
one
that
in the video that they found at the house in Jalalabad, Afghanistan, that was supposedly had like a younger Bin Laden, and it totally looked like early AI.
all I'm saying is I watched some of those videos. The facial movement is extremely stiff. It looks like prosthetics to me. He doesn't look the same. Like, if you were just to type in Bin Laden videos, I could.
Well, this is what's
It's not
cited
even the
by
confession video.
by
It's
the official story. They said, "Oh, Bin Laden confessed."
that second one. The third one down is one of the ones I'm talking about. Yes, right there. So you
Yeah.
watch this Bin Laden tape, and you just look how stiff his face is. And to me, this could be an actual mask. Like, we know that since actually HW, the CIA, had very, very realistic like masks. This is the fat Bin Laden Abbottabad video. Again, looks totally different from that. Those are the early Bin Laden videos that we've all seen. But again, you look at the Bin Laden situation, and he's got U.S. intelligence written all over him prior. He's got Pakistani intelligence all the way up until the day before 9/11. A lot of people don't know this, but Dan Rather, in January of 2002, did a large-scale piece where they went down to a hospital in Pakistan where several members that work there, there's another one, there's the other video that I really think is suspect. But again, who knows? They basically treated bin Laden at the behest of the Pakistani military and protected him that night, and then ushered him off that evening. So Pakistan had a much larger connection to bin Laden right out of the gates. Again, I asked Weldon about that, and he kind of turned it into Iran. He said he really didn't have that information on Pakistan. I don't know, man. I want to know if we're even going to get down to the truth of the 60s assassinations. And 9/11 is absolutely the crux. But there are literally dozens and dozens of other things that we need to come clean on, from Iran-Contra to, MK Ultra and Artichoke and Bluebird. And those are just the mind control programs that we know about. You know as well as anybody, if not more than anybody, the amount of technology that has been hidden from the American and global public is astounding.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I say, like, with the D. Harold Bird at the depository building, there's a lot of connections to aerospace, and especially in, with what happened after, like, just the defense industry and the military industrial complex in general. They needed these wars, and they talked about it. They wrote about it in the Project for the New American Century. But the fact that these guys were being funded, wasn't there another funding connection to, like, Bandar Bush in the
so Bandar Bush was his last name wasn't really Bush, by the way. I forget what it was Prince Bandar. And
Bandar bin Sultan.
Yes, and he was so tight with the first Bush administration. That's where he got the moniker Bandar Bush, and obviously that bled into the second Bush administration. He's no longer alive. I don't know that there was any money directly connected to Bandar Bush, but Bandar Bush, I keep calling him Prince Bandar, is the one that essentially got the flights okayed and got the bin Laden family out of there. So, like, that is in Fabled Enemies. You can watch while everybody else was grounded, they were getting members of the bin Laden family out of the United States just, like, immediately. And what's really funny about that is they were doing it at the same time that many of the FBI agents that would have been working immediately on the case in New York were grounded for between 24 and 48 hours because they were all the way in California running exercises, anti-terror
Yeah.
drills. Yes.
Who is responsible for sending all the anti-terrorism task force to California from the FBI?
It's
That
it's one of those questions nobody asks and nobody seems to be aware of. And
I
like
know.
again, I put that in Fabled Enemies because I had one of those FBI agents talking about it and how they had been grounded and how they had to go across the country. And this is one of those things that was brought up with Schaefer. I had met Anthony Schaefer at a speaking event back in 2010. Okay, in New York City at one of the churches. And we were in a private room together in the back green room. And I started talking to him about the war games and the red and blue teams that they talk about in Amalgam Virgo. So, for those that don't know about Amalgam Virgo, this is a war game being run by the United States government in the summer before 9/11 that has Bin Laden on the cover. And not only does it have Bin Laden on the cover, but they have commercial airliners being hijacked, amongst many other scenarios, by the way. That's why there's a red and blue team, and there's different timelines on this. But the commercial airliner is flown into the Capitol building. So it's not flown into the White House, and it's not flown into the Pentagon, but it's another D.C. target. They show you the route out of Alaska, the whole nine. So this had red and blue teams on it. And I asked him, I said, is there a possibility that some of these hijackers, were actually U.S. government agents that thought they were running a war game, right? And at that point, 2010, he just couldn't wrap his head around that. He was just like, he still couldn't believe that the United States government could have anything to do with it. When I talked to him this time around and I talked about those drills, he goes, I remember that conversation. And he said basically that he couldn't wrap his head around that. And he goes, but if you look at everything that's going on 9/11 with all these drills, what a better way to run a terror attack when at the same time you're mirroring these scenarios everywhere. And what does that tell you? That there's pre-knowledge and there's people on the inside that either allowed this to happen or helped it along the way, right?
Well, this is a great point, Jason, and I'm glad you made it. And in fact, I invited along another expert on an element of this story to join us as the panel. I'd like to introduce Mr. George Webb. And George Webb has done some real deep dive investigation into a fascinating company that came on my radar in my 9/11 research, a company called P-Tech.
Well, it's great seeing Jason again. I did a show with you a while ago, Jason. It's been a while, but it's great to see you. And I'm no expert like Jason is on 9/11. He's been like the day after, I just do the communications piece of it, and I was covering aspiring in Congress using these encrypted BlackBerries. And I had a source. I was looking at people using this encrypted military grade encryption on Capitol Hill, 6 people from about 2004, maybe 2005, all the way until 2020. And this source called me and said, no, it goes back to P-Tech. It goes back to Jack Lew at the Secretary of Treasury, giving these. I'm getting a little bit of a feedback here. I'll turn my volume down. Giving these encrypted, military-grade encrypted devices for 9/11. Also for got people who wired the building. The art students, right? I can't remember their names. But if you look at this kind of operation where you pre-wire 3 buildings for demolition, it's a very large operation, and it has to be what they call a secure access program, an SAP. It has to be compartmentalized. So the guys pre-wiring building 7 and WTC 1 and 2 don't know about the hijackers and where their whereabouts are, et cetera, et cetera. All the pieces have to then come back to a control point, and the codex or the main nerve center of this was P-Tech. P-Tech had all the Department of Defense clearances, right? Plus they had the FAA clearance. Like Jason was saying, these things normally start out as a live exercise, and then they kind of turn into the real thing. So all those things were in place with P-Tech. This Indira Sang, or I can't remember her last name now, but she was the big whistleblower at the time. And so it's really from the encrypted communications point of view that you need something like that to pull something like this off.
Were you talking about Sibel Edmonds by chance with the whistleblower?
Well, I know Sibel and I met
Mhm.
Sibel. No, it was Indira. I'll get her
I
name
think
in
you
a
might be
second.
right with Indira Singh, because I was going to say that Sibel Edmonds, her information kind of revolved around the Pakistani and the Israeli, funding and operations, and the inability once she was a translator to go into those realms and basically stomp out anything that showed it, because a lot of it had to do with nuclear secrets and trades and, the black ops spycraft that we often see in movies. But if we ever start talking about it in the real world, we're the crazy people. It doesn't matter that guys like Robert Maxwell actually exist and have, media empires while they're backdoor selling promise and carnivore software to different intel agencies connected not only to Israel and the UK but also Russia. He dies on a boat named after his daughter, who's involved in the largest child sex trafficking scandal that we publicly know about. I mean, just that paragraph alone sounds completely insane, but it's totally true. And as far as the communications that went on that day, one of the fascinating things that kind of cross references the drills is that we were able to get the NORAD tapes from, I think, in 2004 or 5, somewhere around there, 4 or 5 years after. Vanity Fair got them before we did. But then we got the direct link, and I even burned them for Webster Tarpley. The big takeaway for me is, like you said, if you start listening to them, and there were all these different channels, when the attack initially starts, the two people that are in command are like, wait a minute, is this real world or exercise? Did this start early? Because they had, I believe, a hijacking coming in. It was somewhere in the 9 a.m. range, so not quite 8:45, right? So it looked like it was like 20 minutes before. And then all of a sudden he's like, no, this is real world. A lot of the debunkers out there will say, well, immediately after the attacks, all these phantoms went away. Not real. Richard Myers, number one, testified, amongst others, that they fought, quote unquote, many phantoms that day. But those NORAD tapes clearly showed that the drills being run outside of Cheyenne Mountain, or inside of Cheyenne Mountain, I should say, had those phantoms and planes hijacked 20 minutes after United 93 and whatever happened there. And they stay on the line. They're like, we're staying on the line until you cut these exercises. And lo and behold, it's after all the exercises are cut off, and 93, which obviously didn't go as planned, folks. Like, clearly whatever happened there wasn't meant to happen, that everything stops. So the drills, to me, are the ultimate cover for this operation of confusion, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of them we had traced back to Rand Corporation, a guy named Bruce Hoffman. Bruce Hoffman wrote the scenario for WTC 93. He had also tried to talk about, we need a DHS, we need a big event, to get everybody serious about terror. Global terrorism, or the war on terror, took the place of the fall of the Soviet Union. We need a new bogeyman. So when Kurt Weldon came out on Tucker, he acted like, he was the whistleblower, and Tucker sort of acted like he was whistleblower. No, Jason Bermas was the whistleblower, right?
Listen,
Right
he
after.
was very gracious to me when he came on my program a couple months ago, and the way I found him again, and obviously, I actually played the section of Able Danger where Kurt Weldon is holding one of the Orion charts, and then some of the hearings from Able Danger. But Weldon was on Jimmy Dore, and he was. If you haven't seen the Jimmy Dore interview, he's the Red Hulk. He is screaming the entire time, and he's beat red and upset. And I actually know Kurt Metzger, who's like the co-host. And I immediately texted Kurt. I go, "This is a banger. I'm so glad that Jimmy is having this on." But he didn't make the CIA revelation on there. So at the time, better times, if you will, when Patriot TV was doing better, and I had a producer, I said, "You need to get me Kurt Weldon and Anthony Schaefer," because from that meeting with Schaefer in 2010, we'd been Facebook friends. After Jimmy Dore had that interview, Schaefer posted that not only was the interview, but more things about 9/11 were going to be coming out. And he had knowledge of that, and he talked to administration officials. So that's when I had Schaefer on. And like I said, he essentially said he talked to Trump himself, and Trump wants it out. I don't know what Trump knows. I don't know if Trump's seen a 5-minute video, if he's seen a documentary, if he's read a book, if he's talked to an insider. You know, one of the other just astounding interviews I got through my producer this year was Rudy Giuliani in October. I never thought I was going to be interviewing Rudy Giuliani. First thing I bring up with him on 9/11 is the Pakistani funding and the fact that Joe Biden was one of the guys that met with General Mahmoud Ahmed in D.C. He actually went on TV and bragged about it, folks. Like, it's Brian Gumbel, I think. It's one of the funniest interviews you'll ever see because he talks about how he's the most powerful person in Pakistan, or if not, the second most powerful. And he talks about how, you know, he's got to get on board and who are our friends and enemies. And then later on, when Luke Rudkowski confronts him about it, he admits it again in the 2008 presidential campaign. Second time, he says it's classified, can't talk about it. So at that point, Giuliani literally says, we need to declassify everything about 9/11. Okay, all right, Rudy. I didn't think we were going to go there. At the end of the interview, I was like, listen, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring it up. I had tried to get an interview with his right-hand man, City Corporation Counsel Michael Hess. Why? Michael Hess is the other guy that got blown up in Building 7 with Barry Jennings, who we did get the interview with and is now deceased. So I brought that up with him. I said, hey, your City Corporation Counsel got blown up in Building 7. He got rescued there. What can you tell me about this? And so he kind of toes the line a little bit. He goes, well, they were lucky enough to rescue him. And he goes, but there was or little loss of life there. So he knows people died in Building 7. And he knows the excuse why they didn't talk about it. So he corrects himself at the end. Off the air, I wanted to be respectful. I turned it off. And I said, Rudy, I got to ask you. I go, you don't think that they demoed that building? 7, at least. And I'll say this. On air, and you can go check it out, he had actually brought up the fact that the CIA and the Secret Service were all in there, and it was a big spook office. And he'd also brought up the fact that they put snipers on the roof after the fact to clean up those documents. That's something I think we even included in Loose Change. So I asked him after the fact, I go, come on. And he goes, I don't think they blew it up because of all the documents in there. He goes, if the CIA wanted to destroy stuff and they were looking to get rid of a bunch of stuff, they could have absolutely done it. So I haven't had him back on yet, but I'm obviously going to pursue that angle again. And look, that's the thing. I think that a lot of these people that we think don't have blind spots do have blind spots, right? I mean, even Weldon now talking about the demolition and being in, the building after the 93 bombing in the basement where it was blown up. He never once alluded to any of that in any of the hearings, interviews, paperwork. I don't, and now when you talk to him about it, he says he immediately knew something was wrong when he was on the scene there. But I mean,
look at who did the 93 World Trade Center investigation and the report and that assessed the damages to the building and repaired them. They had to get access to the engineering blueprints for the building. Mm-hmm. Very interesting because it was Tridata Corp, which is a division of SPC International, which is the comptroller of the Pentagon's company on 9/11.
Well, again, Dov Zakheim, and he's got, connections to remote-controlled aircraft. That's a whole nother tunnel you can go down. Weldon off the air, because we're bringing up 93, okay? I brought up to him that Ahmed Salam, who was the person recruited by the FBI to infiltrate the Blind Sheik, was the guy that actually made the bomb. And he only did so with the help of the ATF and his FBI handlers, including John Antisev. And the only reason that we know that is because he started taping his conversations with Antisev when Antisev told him that they had to make the bomb. And so there's this famous recording, I put it in Invisible Empire, where the guy who built the bomb is like, I feel terrible. People died in this thing. And he's like, oh yeah, no, it's really unfortunate. Some things happened that shouldn't have happened. And he's like, oh, what a wonderful case. You're an FBI informant. Builds the bomb that blows up the World Trade Center. And nobody still knows that. Weldon knew that. He goes, I know, Jason. You know what he said after that? He goes, same thing in 95 with the Oklahoma City bombing. And I was like, all right, Kurt, we're on the same page. So, look, I want to believe that Kurt Weldon is going to be able to help nudge this thing forward. I truly don't think that you can even get the semblance of a constitutional republic back unless you get into the truth about 9/11 and then criminal accountability. I don't even know what that means, right? Like, we just got more Crossfire hurricane documents. Not that we needed them. We already knew that, Trump wasn't getting pissed on by Russian hookers. Like, whatever fantasy land you want to be in, that's not real, okay? Is anyone going to go to jail for that? I don't think so. Like, I did the Reawaken America tour for the last, 2.5 years, talking about transhumanism and mostly a lot of anti-Musk stuff. I'm not going to mention the person's name, but you've seen him on every alternative media talk show out there. I've interviewed him several times. He's an ex-special forces guy and a lawyer. And this NPR woman, she'd been to a couple of these things, and, you could tell what her angle was. But he's sitting there talking about the enemies list and the people that are going to jail and the people that he's working with and all this other stuff. And she's really interested in this, because she wants to have a headline, all these other things. And all I'm doing to everybody that's listening to this in awe, like, oh, it's really, I'm like, none of this is real. No, not one person that he just mentioned is going to be serving any time in a federal penitentiary whatsoever, ever. And this guy, unfortunately, listen, I think he's a well-meaning guy, total delusions of grandeur, total egomania. I'm sorry, you might think you're doing the right thing. I'm a little guy. I know where my reach lies, okay? Even if I had all the law degrees in the world, what is the precedent of anybody in the executive office going to jail for any type of war crime at all? Where? Show it to me, because I missed it. Iran-Contra is the last time we had any kind of accountability. Most of that was I brought that up with Rudy, because he was talking about Rudy's new book. The reason he came on the show was he had a book about the Biden crime family. And the first 5-10 minutes, he's talking about how they're going to jail. And I had to stop him. I go, Rudy, no one's going to jail. Like, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, I'm like, let's stop. I go, we started talking about Bill Barr. And then he brings up that Bill Barr had the Hunter Biden laptop for 10 months before the media even was talking about it, right? And I go, yeah, you're proving my point. The guy who's the attorney general has the evidence before the media, and not only does no one go to jail, but they cover it up and have a bunch of other intel officers sign against it. I go, no one's going to jail, Rudy. Let's stop with the fantasy, because it is a fantasy. The Bidens ain't going to jail. Hillary Clinton ain't going to jail. I want
convicted rapist President Donald Trump isn't going to jail.
Well, I mean, listen, as far as Trump goes, let me say this. The last person in the executive branch that went to prison for anything corrupt, and it wasn't a war crime, it was Scooter Libby, who took the fall for the Enron crimes, and Dick Cheney. Trump pardoned him. Now, did Scooter Libby get a raw deal compared to all the other criminals? You bet. Were his hands clean? Absolutely not. But, I mean, again, compare what he did with the massive amount of crimes that we know mainstay players that our household names have done. And they're, like I mentioned Scooter Libby, 1 out of 1,000 people knows who that is at this point. Maybe. Like, if I went door knocking, you tell me who's Scooter Libby, nobody's going to know that. Had they put Dick Cheney in jail, everybody would know that name. There's the big difference. So, look, I think that this administration is very different than others. I've met Kash Patel. Kash Patel walked off my show. There's another one.
Kash Patel was on your show. Hey, Jason, could you turn your mic down just a little tiny bit?
You bet I can, sir. Yes, I had Kash Patel on, obviously before he was the FBI director. We're probably talking about a year and a half ago. And the other thing was Patel is actually on that tour I was talking about. So I'd see him on the peripheral. Physically a very small, unintimidating man. I hope that his vigor and fervor goes well beyond that. Maybe it does. I brought up the signature reduction program with him, okay? Because he was basically on this train of talking about social media collusion with big government and how they're going to take it to him. And I go, yeah, that's all great. But the signature reduction program has been running since 2012, bare minimum. And for those not aware of the signature reduction program, maybe I'll bring it up right here and just read the first paragraph because it is so important. It is like the most important thing. So let me do that because it's right here. So everybody needs to read this. It's about a 40, 50-minute read. Exclusive. Inside the military's secret undercover army. Now, the first paragraph says the largest undercover force the world has ever known is the one created by the Pentagon over the past decade. Some 60,000 people now belong to this secret army, many working under masked identities and in low profile, all part of a broad program called signature reduction, which, by the way, is not the official name. It is literally an art form. Okay, that's what they refer to it as. The force, more than 10 times the size of the clandestine elements of the CIA, carries out domestic and foreign assignments, both in military uniform and under civilian cover, in real life and online. These are the Russian bots, everybody. Sometimes hiding in private businesses and consultancies, some of them household name companies, aka the Googles of the world, the Twitters of the world, anything that's significant, all the military industrial complex. Now, they actually follow around one of these guys, and I want to show everybody this because it's important. So we were talking about masks earlier. This is a DARPA manufactured silicone hand sleeve that goes over your hand, that creates fake identities, and not only has anybody's biometrics on it that you want, but it also emits human oils. And if you want the full garb, I mean, they've got that too. You know, they can make you look like a monster. So when I brought up that program to him, and I essentially said, well, we have this program that's never been audited, where they literally have access to every type of Social Security, driving record you can imagine, so they can alter it or create it on the fly. Like the guy that he's following around is in a car with a fake license plate where the guy has a fake identity and it's all legit stuff. It's just none of it's real. And they're carrying out, again, domestic operations. I brought that up. He waited till the commercial break. He jumped ship. The producer said that I was getting too QAnon, because we all know how QAnon I've been. And I'm like, the program's right here. I want this thing audited. Like, are you kidding me? We're talking about the CIA or the NSA spying on people. These people are openly running operations where they have access to not only all of your records, but all records to manipulate situations where they can not only take your identity, but frame you. Like, the silicone hand sleeve was a lot for me. And think about how old that technology is.
That's really good.
Framing too, because DNA evidence goes a long way in court. So if they just have a toenail or a toenail clipping or a piece of your hair and they plant it at the crime scene, most people in a jury are going to be like, well, his DNA, what's his DNA doing there? And you're done.
Long Island serial killer right now, five hairs, rootless hairs. That's what they're using to convict the guy in New York right now for the Long Island serial killer.
Mm-hmm. Oh, really? See, well, I mean, that's pretty wild too, because you could go to a jail or go to court and find just hairs and leave them at crime scenes. So it just gives them a false trail to find, and they're just gonna like, yeah, it's pretty wild what they can do these days. But let's talk about back to 9/11, the framing of these hijackers. Because there was a 20th hijacker named Zacharias Moussaoui, and there was a number of other people that were deemed unfit to stand trial after decades of torture. They didn't give these guys a trial. They held them and tortured them mercilessly. And I always like to point out and tell people about the whole UFO connection to this, because one of the guys who took place in that torture stuff was a guy named Luis Elizondo. And Luis Elizondo then went and joined up with this guy Tom DeLonge, the Blink-182 rock star, and they formed this group called TTSA with a whole bunch of other CIA people, and basically created a limited hangout operation in a counterintelligence operation. He's a counterintelligence expert, and that's what he did with the whole 9/11 bullshit. But they moved him from 9/11 bullshit to UFO bullshit, and he's now like just doing the UFO circuit, pretending like he's some kind of expert and professional on all this. Like, really, just it's crazy.
Just because you brought up the 20th hijacker and Musawi, I've got to reiterate, during his quote-unquote trial, they had him in a physical stun belt. So if he dared to speak out of turn, they would shock him. That was in a U.S. court. That was not in a military tribunal. Just type it in. Musawi stun belt. Now, the other big news story, you're just alluding to Guantanamo Bay. Again, one of those things that I talk about constantly, being in this game for so long, is in 2008 when you had, the Democratic players running for the president. It was actually the very first YouTube debate. Everybody can go check it out. Anderson Cooper moderated it. They had people present questions via YouTube and do it. Every single establishment politician up there, every one of them said they were going to close down Guantanamo Bay. Now, there were two genuine voices up there, Dennis Kucinich and Michael Gravel. Let me tell you the all-stars that also pledged that they were going to close Guantanamo Bay that absolutely didn't and had the opportunity. Barack Starr, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, all three of them, that would be part of that next administration, pledged that they were going to shut down Guantanamo Bay, along with other losers like John Edwards. I'm pretty sure, what's his name? Richardson was up there, the Ben Richardson, who was connected to Epstein at New Mexico, the governor, and the Clintons big time. They all said they were going to close Gitmo. Now they're going to expand Gitmo to put illegals in it. Meanwhile, they're still torturing two of the 9/11 suspects. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is obviously the bigger name of the two. But I saw people were like outraged that they were going to cut some kind of deal with them. Guys, they've been in a torture facility for 20 plus years with no due process whatsoever, and the most minuscule insight you could ever get into their military tribunal trials. Does that sound like some individuals you could actually convict of a crime? It's going to take 20 plus years? As soon as they were there for a couple years and the levers weren't turning, people should have been outraged. The fact that they're outraged that they're not going to kill these people outright when you didn't even see a trial. And obviously they had nothing to do with the demolitions of 1, 2, and 7. And I would say there's probably some other explosive activity at 6 as well. That rooftop is blown up, it doesn't look like it's caved in. And by the way, when you actually watch one of the towers go down, there seems to be a separate explosion just where 6 is that has its own individual plume. There's a lot going on 9/11. There's also what appears to be, and I know this sounds totally nuts, but a surface-to-air missile being fired. I think it's from the Sears Tower in New York City. There's a video where it's right on top, and all of a sudden you just see this thing flare out and go through, and I'm like, what is going on there? You couple that with not one, but 2 vans with these Israeli operatives. It wasn't one. George Washington Bridge had another incident on it. One of those vans exploded on King Street. That's another thing no one even talks about. Literally, we have the audio of the police. It's in Fabled Enemies. People go check it out, where they pull these guys over. They said they get them out of the van, and the van exploded. Now, if you read the paperwork after that, they beat the shit out of those guys after that. They beat them very badly. They were they'd already been subdued, and then the van exploded, and they got emotional, and they beat them up. Now, that's not on audio tape. Shocking. But it is in the report that let's just say they were in the best shape when they brought them in. Why doesn't anyone talk about that? It's maddening to me on so many levels. Another big thing, another 9/11 mystery no one wants to talk about. Sander Hicks did a book called The Big Wedding. All right, and I encourage everybody to read it. Very much goes down the history trail of U.S. intelligence, 70s, 80s, Mujahideen, Bin Laden connections, that type of thing. But a lot of it is told in the modern day through this Canadian intelligence operative that may or may not be full of total shit, right? He can't get a beat on him. He's got a very weird relationship with this teenage boy that's not his kid. He ends up in jail, but he has this list of targets while he's in jail that he gives to the police officers there, and he said these are going to get hit on September 11th. Okay. Not only is everything on that list that does get hit, but the same list ends up in the hands of the governor of Maryland on the morning of 9/11 before the attacks happened. So he goes on the air. I know that another little spot, a lot of people don't know this one, again, in Fabled Enemies, Paris Glendening, the governor of Maryland, goes on the air and he's getting interviewed and he's like, I got a list this morning and a call from the police department where all these targets were there. I think he says the Sears Tower was on there and there were some other ones. But the same list that this Canadian operative had, Paris Glendening gets on the morning of 9/11. All of these things are things that have not only not been mentioned in the mainstream, but the alternative doesn't seem to know about. So, look, I want to see a new investigation just like Kurt Weldon. I don't know who you put in charge of it, right? There are so many players that are at jeopardy. I mean, look at Israel right now. Like that is the biggest danger to global stability outside of Ukraine, Russia, and NATO. And quite frankly, it all intermingles. You got the same guy in power, Netanyahu, that said, I think it was in 2008 or 9, it might have been a little bit before that, maybe 7, that we are benefiting from one thing right now, and it's the attacks of September 11th. Like openly, like you go check that quote out. Like it's an insane quote. And although I don't necessarily think that Israel carried everything out, they obviously had surveillance on the ground. They had teams all over the hijackers. That network wasn't just in New York and D.C. In fact, in Fabled Enemies, we have that spot, but go rewatch that Fox series. They had picked over 100 of these guys up prior to 9/11. And it went all the way across the country. They were in California. Everybody talks about the art students, right? One of the other things that they were doing is they had kiosks in malls. So you remember, back before we had the little mini drones, you had those little like Velcro helicopters where you'd zip tie the thing and it'd go flying up. They were running kiosks there. And then they were intermingling with army and military personnel so that they could figure out where they worked at secret locations. And they were able to find a ton of different secret locations. I mean, again, and that's in there that they had infiltrated all these things. So that's one aspect. I think with the Pakistani military, again, that's kind of a proxy organization for the United States. What are they doing without the U.S. or British intelligence? I don't necessarily know. Again, that Omar Saeed Sheikh story is insane. And then you have to get into the players in the United States because there has to be some. And the continuity of government program and the E4Bs is another one of those aspects that just does not get brought up enough. And again, shows that there is some kind of pre-intelligence, or you wouldn't have seen these doomsday planes on the scene of the World Trade Center before the second plane strike. You can clearly see one of the E4Bs is there. And then in D.C., less than a minute after whatever happens at the Pentagon, you see another E4B there. Well, we know there was at least 4 of those over the country that day, and 2 of them happened to be at the scenes of the attacks. I think that's a big question worth asking.
Well, Enron, the Enron investigation was going on at the Securities Exchange Commissions in Building 7. I think that's another one of those that because I worked in the Woolworth building when they moved out of 7 and into the Woolworth building because they didn't have a building anymore. So there was definitely a big cover up there, and they were doing oil deals. General Shelton was doing oil deals, and Kurt Weldon was very connected into this group. He's very connected into Rumsfeld. He was very connected into Cheney and Bush. He in the interview, he talks about them being like personal references. Mm-hmm. And, those are not the first 3 guys that would come to mind. So
No, it's interesting you mentioned that because in Building 7, most of the floors were actually leased by a company called Solomon Smith Barney, and Solomon Smith Barney, had both, Rumsfeld and Cheney on their foreign policy advisory board, and they both quit to join the Bush administration, so that's another huge connection that people miss to Building 7.
Well, Weldon also talks about how he was set to, head up the Armed Services Committee. He talks about his relationship with James Woolsey, former head of the CIA, and
Genie Energy.
yes, and not a person that I trust, by the way, Woolsey. So again, you get into these scenarios, and it's been very weird for me because, again, now that I'm actually talking to some of these people and meeting them in person, like spending time with General Flynn, I never thought I would be doing that either. I mean, obviously.
Yeah, that's wild because you interviewed Rudy, and Rudy was somebody that many others figured as a suspect early on, and
well, again, I don't necessarily know that he's not a suspect on smaller parts of the cover-up after the fact, whether he knows it or not, right? Because everybody's covering up something for someone. But, like, I don't think...
So there's plausible deniability in every step as an operative.
It's just always there. But if you just look at the hard science, like Giuliani is in hearings talking about the 2,000+ degree temperatures at the World Trade Center. Pataki is on the record saying the same exact thing, who was the governor at the time. And no matter what you want to say about eyewitnesses and all these other things, you can't fake the NASA thermal imagery that shows those temperatures. And there it was. There was the first part of this very, very important discussion about 9/11. I do want to remind everybody, I cannot do it without you. Please, please consider donating $5, $10, $15. It means the world to me. I absolutely love you guys, and we will see you on the flip side.